Hi everyone, it's Jessica. Welcome back to another video. I'm coming to you from New York and very jet lagged, but alive, so that's good. Hope you're doing good wherever you are. And today's topic is something that's been on my mind for some time, but I just haven't sat down to film or write something. So hopefully I'll also do like a Substack post on this topic. And anyway, the topic is wholeness. So I wanted to share a quote and then like two other examples that I have come across in books that I read. And the quote is by Carl Jung, and he wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. And I probably came across this quote like either last year or the year before. I think it really stuck out to me as I was doing more shadow work, which, if you're not familiar with shadow work, it's basically becoming more aware slash shedding more light on the repressed aspects of your personality, called the shadow. And there's like many reasons why those aspects of yourself have been repressed, but it could be because of like social pressures or like gender roles or like concept of the self, things like that. But yeah, I think as I was doing more of that work, like the concept of integration really stood out to me, because I think it's very true that in my experience, like as we confront the darkness, which doesn't always have to be negative, right? It's just like whatever aspects of ourselves that we've repressed. As we confront the darkness more, we're able to achieve more of that wholeness, that light, and that feeling of authenticity and self acceptance. And when you know yourself more, I think you're able to act in a way that is more authentic because you know like who you are. So I think the words like integration and wholeness really stood out to me as like interconnected. Um, and I've come across the concept of wholeness also in two other books that I read. The first one is from Robert Sapolsky's The Trouble with Testosterone, and it's a compilation of a bunch of his essays. Um, Robert Sapolsky is a neuroscientist and I think evolutionary biologist at Stanford. He also wrote Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which is quite well known. And I've read some of it, but it's a bit more technical. But he also has a very funny writing style. So I recommend his work. And this book was a really fun read also because it's like essays across like a wider variety of topics, and more, I think, for like a general audience, as opposed to like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. I think it's a bit more technical. It has like diagrams of like the brain, I think. So it's a little bit, focused, but I think like still check out his stuff. um and the passage that I wanted to read comes from the essay called Measures of Life. And he's actually using an example from Tversky and Kahneman's work. And they are psychologists that also have been well known in the field of like behavioral economics. But it gets to the point of like wholeness and kind of like how we have these cognitive biases towards wholeness. So I'll share this snippet with you. Okay, so he's providing a scenario from their work, like Tversky and Kahneman's work. In a population, all the deaths are attributable to two diseases, each accounting for half the deaths. You have a choice. You can discover something that cures all the known cases of one disease, or you can discover something that cures half the cases of each disease. So it's like you can either cure like 100% of one of the diseases or half of each, and there's two diseases. And then Sapolsky continues, by now it should be clear that the two options are formally equivalent. 1 times 1 half is equal to 1 times 1 half plus 1 times 1 half. So that's just like if you were to cure like one, all of one versus like half of each, right? And it's the math is the same. Yet people show a strong bias towards curing all the causes of one disease. That kind of integer satisfies a sense of closure. In spite of our poetry and abstract theorems and tangible and dreams, our cognitive pull is toward being concrete and tangible. Cross that disease off the list of things to worry about. So I thought this was an interesting example because it demonstrates that while rationally, like, there is not a reason to choose one over the other since the math's the same, technically. But still, I think a lot of people would choose, like, oh, I would for sure cure 100% of one disease than half of each because it somehow just like feels better to do that. It's like Sapolsky writes, like, cross that disease off the list and like you don't have to worry about it anymore. And there's also a feeling of completion, of wholeness. Like, oh, I cured all of this one. Like, yeah, this other one, like, I didn't, but all of one, right? As opposed to like half of each. So I think this example is just an interesting way of thinking about how, as humans, we seem to have this pull towards wholeness, towards completion, towards 100% of something, despite it logically not making that much sense. Um, and then, so that's one example. The next one is from Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols, which I've been reading for some time and I'm still only like halfway done. This book is basically it's 5 parts, and then Carl Jung wrote the first part, and then I think the rest are like authors writing from themes that Jung wrote about in the first part. His part is called Approaching the Unconscious, which talks about like dreams and things like that. And then other authors have different angles on the things that he wrote about. So this is from M.L. von Franz's The Process of Individuation, which is like a tricky word to say. And I'll just preface this by saying that, like, Jung's idea of individuation is sort of analogous, I think, to becoming whole. I think it might be like this, they might be synonyms for each other. I don't know the exact distinction or if there even is one, but Freud or Jung would often Jung like uses the word individuation, I think, to mean wholeness or like kind of a growth slash completion of the self. Like, in a process of individuation is like a person becoming like whole in themselves, like becoming who you are, and it's kind of seen as like the ultimate goal in some ways. So I think, like, when you hear like individuation, you can kind of think about like the process of becoming whole, like wholeness. And uh this author is writing about an interpretation of a dream that I think one of his patients had. And I'll just read it. Symbolically, this points to the fact that often the urge toward individuation appears in a veiled form, hidden in the overwhelming passion one may feel for another person. In fact, passion that goes beyond the natural measure of love ultimately aims at the mystery of becoming whole. And this is why one feels, when one has fallen passionately in love, that becoming one with the other person is the only worthwhile goal of one's life. So I thought this was an interesting example because you can think about even in the English language, there's a lot of language around becoming whole, like especially as it pertains to partnering with another person, like they complete me, or like my better half, finding your other half, like right. It's when we talk about falling in love, like partnering with someone, it's a lot about that completion, that like they complete me. And so I think the author is getting at the fact that like I mean, through this dream analysis that he's doing, it's about the dreamer becoming aware that it like falling in love and like getting into a serious relationship with this person is the real goal of life now. And it's like through the dream, like he's realizing that basically. But I thought it was an interesting example because it's showing that like um becoming one with another person, like as he writes, like becoming one with the other person is the only worthwhile goal of one's life. It's like another example of how as humans we have this pull and desire to become whole, and how we think we can do that is through loving someone else. And it's like a different example than like the one that Sapolsky shares about having this cognitive bias towards like wanting to like cure all of the diseases, like 100% of one disease, right? Versus like half of each. And in this case, it's like becoming like falling in love with someone so deeply that like becoming one with them is like your ultimate goal. So these are both like examples from like two different examples that I feel like get at the same point, which is that as people, we have this desire to like become whole. And maybe all of the things that we do are in pursuit of the feeling of wholeness. And I think it's such an interesting concept because when we think about wanting to fall in love, wanting to check things off our list, wanting to feel a sense of inbox zero or something, or like a literal inbox zero, like are we doing things because we want to feel like wholeness, like completion? And I think yeah, the concept of wholeness is just so interesting because um, Freud also talks about this idea of like the only time, like we're born, as soon as we're born, we're not whole because the only time we were whole was when we were in the womb and like we didn't have any other needs. Like as soon as you leave the womb, you have needs. Like you're like hungry, you're cold, you're hot, like all of these things. And then maybe it's like after we're born, we're just like forever in search of wholeness, of meeting our needs and like feeling whole again. So I want to go back to where we started, which is the quote by Carl Jung. I'll read it again, and it goes: wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. So I think Jung probably has so much quotable stuff on like individuation and like wholeness and everything, but I feel like this gets at a pretty important part, which is that to become whole, like we also need to think about the aspects of ourselves that are contrary, like the shadow sides of ourselves, the different aspects of ourselves that maybe are fighting for a chance to like see the light of day or like get the time and space that they need to like express themselves. And if nothing else, I think the examples show that we do have this desire to feel whole, and hopefully by integration of more of the contraries, by exploring more of the shadow aspects of ourselves, we can learn what we need to become whole, and through that maybe we can just get that one step closer to the wholeness that we all desire. So that is the thoughts that I've had. That's my spiel on like wholeness. And yeah, I think it's interesting always like reading from different genres or like um areas of work, because I think you find that there's so much connection between seemingly like disparate areas of study, like from the psychology to, I guess, like Jung is also in some ways like psychology, but Sapolsky is more on like the neuroscience side of things. But yeah, a lot of things are so interconnected, so it's always fun to like play around and like see themes pop up across different domains of study. But I hope that some of this resonated with you, and that through integrating more of your contrary personality traits, you can also find yourself inching towards the wholeness of your being. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.